I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story and welcome to a sunny Monday. Now you might notice something different tonight. No, it's not my suit jacket. I'm saying hello live at 6:30 instead of 6 o'clock. And I know for you folks online, doesn't make any difference, but it's big for us. And it's happened because we've swapped time slots with David and Laurel. You'll find the normal news show now happening at 6 o'clock and our show, The Story, begins at 6:30 from now on. Don't worry, if our 6:30 start time doesn't always work for you, you can always find segments and full episodes on the KGW YouTube channel or our streaming app, which is called KGW Plus. Anyway, we've got a great show for you here tonight, and everything from analyzing the billions spent to save salmon to some results from that investigation we told you about earlier this year. But let's start with a story of revival. Hundreds of newspapers in small towns have been disappearing, but there's a small news outlet in Southern Oregon that is flipping that script, and it's actually growing after replacing a staple in the community. And that, my friends, is our big story tonight. 6 months ago, the Medford Mail Tribune newspaper closed its doors for good. It had served Southern Oregon for more than 100 years. They even won a Pulitzer Prize back in 1934, the first ever for an Oregon news outlet, for coverage of unscrupulous politicians in Jackson County. The closure this year left a lot of people upset and concerned, and for good reason. Research has shown that when a community loses a news outlet, people there suffer. Take those unscrupulous politicians, for example. You need local journalists around to keep your politicians in check and to tell you what your government's doing and how they're spending your money, for example. Luckily for people in Medford, it was only a matter of days before another newspaper started up with plans to get back to doing good old-fashioned journalism, and in print, no less. Ashley Koch went down to Medford to see how they're doing.
In downtown Medford, smoke fills the air from nearby wildfires. Inside the tiny newsroom of the brand new Rogue Valley Times, the news team is making a game plan to cover the fires.
Find a person and start to tell their story. Use all of your senses. Use your ears and your eyes.
The rest of the team is working on other stories this morning. They're following up on an investigation, making plans to cover a community event. But it's July in Oregon, and they're ready to drop everything if more fires break out. The team is small, but it's growing. They started 5 months ago sharing a conference table. Now they've moved into a historic bank building in the heart of downtown.
This is one of the marquee intersections in downtown Medford. And as we were outgrowing our first office, which is 3 blocks from here, it was really important to us to stay in the heart of downtown.
David Summers is the publisher of the Rogue Valley Times. But it's a startup, so he wears a lot of hats.
I have tools in my desk because it's easier for me to go fix the stuck lock than it is to go bring in a locksmith sometimes.
He says the location is part of an effort to restore what was lost when the Medford Mail Tribune suddenly closed up shop back in January.
The Medford Mail Tribune newspaper had been around for over 100 years. This was the community's chronicle of our history.
The paper went through a lot of ownership changes in recent years, and former staff members say it got worse with each new owner, until the last one.
The paper didn't die, it was killed.
That's former Mail Tribune editor Dave Smigelski. He says the last owners of the paper, Rosebud Media, experimented with focusing on video over articles in an effort to lure in millennials. It didn't work, and the staff was given 2 days' notice that the paper was going to close, leaving the lingering question, who's going to cover the news?
This is the largest city between San Francisco and Eugene and Portland, or Boise to the east.
Medford has a TV station and a public radio station, but the Mail Tribune had been the only newspaper left to cover a metropolitan area of 223,000 people.
Southern Oregon, the Rogue Valley, Medford, Jackson County, this is a community that has a passion for local news.
Medford was on the cusp of becoming the latest news desert. Northwestern University found that 360 newspapers have shut down since the end of 2019, most of them serving small communities. An estimated 75,000 journalists worked in newspapers in 2006, and now that's down to only 31,000, according to the same study. About 70 million Americans live in a county with either no local news organization or only one. But Medford seems to be avoiding that fate. Within days of the Mail Tribune shutting down, Plans were in motion to start a brand new newspaper from the ground up, backed by EO Media, which owns other newspapers in Oregon, including the Bend Bulletin and the East Oregonian. Dave Smigelski says he had been thinking about retiring, but it didn't take long for him to change his mind. He signed on as editor and hired the news staff, many of him his colleagues from the Mail Tribune.
All of the people who are out there said yes before I had the ask out of my mouth.
He says they're committed to bringing back journalism that serves the community. Local coverage of events, arts and entertainment, sports, and deep investigations. On his team is investigative reporter Buffy Pollock, who worked for the Mail Tribune for more than 20 years.
And as soon as they called, I was just, yes, absolutely.
With the Rogue Valley Times, she's been able to spend weeks reporting on the death of a caregiver that no one had known about.
We found out that this woman had been attacked and died as a result of her job, and nothing happened.
We dug into that story. The police didn't know about it. The state didn't know about it. The county didn't know about it. And so our reporting brought to light the fact that her death had occurred, number one. And then number two, we were able to document numerous injuries by other employees at this company, by the person who is accused of injuring and killing Bobby.
That particular story is going to end up having impact at the state level.
It's that kind of impact that publisher David Summers says he's proud to watch.
These are journalists who have decades-long relationships, who have built sources and are wired into this community in a way that I am in awe of.
Because these are the reporters doing work that you can only do if you live here and you know the city the way that they do.
What's happening at Medford City Hall or Jackson County Commission, Ashland City Council, we have to be there to cover that. Nobody can helicopter in to do that.
Summer says the community is happy to have it too. They've gotten a lot of positive feedback and support, which isn't always the case when you work in the news. And in an age when we get most of our news online, even the print edition has grown.
You can literally feel how much heavier and bigger the paper is between these two. Anyone that says that print is dead, they need to come see what's happening in Medford.
Ashley Koch, KGW News.
The paper was initially called the Rogue Valley Tribune, but the former owner of the Medford Mail Tribune threatened to sue, so they changed the name. The paper publishes a print edition 3 times a week. People can get it delivered to their home or they can buy it around town. And they have an online version. You need a subscription for some articles, but not all of them. Go check it out. We think you'll enjoy it. Finally, there's a small world connection. That publisher that you saw in the story, David Summers, he used to work here at KGW 20 years ago. Good luck to you and your crew, David. I'm sure your community appreciates you. Now let's get to a story that may leave you a bit frustrated. It comes in the form of a troubling new study from Oregon State University about the region's endangered salmon runs in the Columbia River Basin. Now, for decades, the goal has been to help the species survive through all the changes that mankind has put them through. That brought things like dam removals and habitat restoration. But the common denominator among all those things, money. It costs a lot of money to save the salmon. And this new study looks at the billions of dollars that have been spent in pursuit of that goal. The big question is it working? Did it make a difference? Environmental reporter Cale Williams explains why this study says, no.
We do not find evidence of an increase in wild fish.
That's Bill Jager, an applied economics professor at Oregon State University. And he's talking about the $9 billion that's been spent over the last 40 years to recover wild salmon in the region's largest river.
Well, for a long time, there's been questions about the effectiveness of a wide range of activities taken to try to restore salmon and steelhead in the Columbia River Basin.
Jager looked at 4 iconic species, sockeye, coho, chinook, and steelhead. And he found that despite all that spending, wild populations of those fish have not increased.
Many of those species that are listed since the 1990s under the Endangered Species Act are ones for which the numbers have declined and continue to be of great concern.
For his analysis, Jager looked at data from the Bonneville Dam, where officials have been counting the number of salmon returning to their spawning grounds for 50 years. Before the dams went up, as many as 16 million wild salmon returned to the Columbia River Basin. In recent years, though, that number has fallen to an average of just 1.5 million. But the dams are far from the only obstacle facing the Pacific Northwest's most iconic fish.
The Columbia River Basin is often described as being the size of France, so it's a large area with lots of things going on, cities, forest, farms, affecting habitat.
The main hurdles for the fish? They're often referred to as the 4 H's.
Hydro, habitat, harvest, and hatchery.
And Jaeger said that sometimes officials looking at how to spend money on salmon conservation, they've taken what he called the path of least resistance. Things like habitat restoration or bounty programs for other fish that prey on salmon.
It's easier to implement those policies in terms of paying people to do things or giving resources to people to do things.
And some other studies have shown that those projects can be effective, but only in a limited way for one rehabilitated stream or for one of the many stages of the salmon life cycle.
But unless you look at the whole life cycle, it may be that you're helping in terms of a limiting factor in one life stage, but the overall limiting factor for that species in terms of their whole life cycle might be in a different life stage.
And Jaeger's been on the other side of this issue as well, serving as an advisor on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council.
Cost effectiveness was a term that was occasionally used in a report, but was never really undertaken as a serious methodology for determining where to spend money. And
so is all this money spent just a big waste?
I'm not sure how useful it is to talk about whether the money was wasted or not. That's behind us. I think what one can do and what one should do is look at this evidence and ask, what should we be doing differently going forward?
And doing things differently might mean that policymakers need to make some tough decisions. Jaeger said that some options, like lowering harvest numbers for fishermen or breaching the dams on the lower Snake River, will have to be looked at, even though they're controversial.
I think they need to be clear-eyed and look at all the options and think seriously about which ones are going to be the most cost-effective, even if it means more pushback from stakeholders.
Cale joins me now, and I know that the salmon were kind of considered the canary in the coal mine. So did the rest of the environment get saved even if the salmon don't have big recovery numbers?
Well, this study didn't really look at the coal mine at all. This one was very focused on how much money's been spent, what it did, and whether that produced any higher numbers of salmon returning to the Columbia River Basin.
And I know you were waiting for a response from the agencies. They just got back to you. What'd they have to say?
Yeah, so I mean, not much. Both of them said that they didn't really have time to look over this whole study and time to get to us, TV deadlines. But they did say that they acknowledge that, there are problems with the salmon populations in the Columbia River, and they think that it's going to take a regional approach, and they want to be part of that conversation moving forward. Kind of what you would expect.
Yeah, and it seems like a whole industry, salmon restoration, has grown up. I mean, billions of dollars here.
Yeah, I mean, $9 billion over the course of 40 years. But, even for all of these smaller organizations, a lot of that money runs directly through the Bonneville Power Administration. They're the federal agency that oversees the hydroelectric system. And so a lot of these smaller environmental organizations will get their money through grants that come through BPA.
And is the takeaway that I'm getting, is it the correct one, that while we've been focused on these smaller little projects, it allows everybody to ignore the big hard question?
Yeah, I mean, what Jaeger told me is that, it's going to take some of these more controversial things, like breaching the lower Snake River dams, like lowering the harvest numbers for commercial and recreational fishermen, these really politically contentious things, to really move the needle. And so far, people have been happy to spend the money on things that are a little more feel-good and don't make people mad.
And the low-hanging fruit, yeah. All right, thank you, Cale Williams. Great stuff as always.
Sure.
Coming up next on The Story, I practice Cale's name over and over. Also, do you ever stop and think about the pots and pans you use to cook and if they're actually safe to use? It likely does not occur to you all that often, but our team found that a popular cooking pot contains high levels of lead. How some investigative reporting forced Amazon to make big changes involving these cutleries when The Story returns. Now to a follow-up on an investigation we first brought you earlier this year about potentially dangerous cookware that's being sold online. Our sister station in Seattle revealed a specific cooking product known as Afghan pressure cookers, and they contained high levels of lead that could poison food. And now Amazon has removed the items from its online marketplace. And one of the best-known distributors of the cookpots in the U.S. also appears to have closed up shop. Here's Chris Ingalls with the update.
I'm going to show you how to cook with this Afghan pressure cooker.
They're called Afghan pressure cookers, an ingenious little pot that's been marketed for the outdoors and for cooking over a live fire. Now, getting your hands on one will be much harder after the largest online retailer pulled them from their site.
We have reviewed Amazon.com here in the United States. We've looked at the Australian site, and we've looked at their co.uk site, and they no longer sell Afghan pressure cookers.
Steve Whitaker is part of the Seattle King County Public Health team that's been testing these traditional Afghan cookers. They determined that the aluminum pots are made of high levels of lead that seep into food.
We know that there is no safe level of lead exposure. And you can imagine for families who are cooking their meals in this lead-containing cookware, children are going to be especially at risk.
The problem was first detected among Afghan immigrant families when tests showed dangerously high levels of lead in the blood of Afghan children, like Faizul Haq Safi's 2 kids.
We went to the public health in downtown Seattle. We tested our kids. They did the blood test, everything, so they tested positive.
King County scientists eventually determined the imported pressure cookers commonly used in Afghan households were made of aluminum cast with other metals that contain lead. They warned Amazon and other online retailers of the consumer danger, but months later, King 5 was still able to purchase the unsafe cookware online. Okay, so this one's not good.
No, that one contains lead.
This would make somebody sick.
Potentially, yes.
After our story in May, Amazon finally acted and removed the entire line of Afghan pressure cookers.
There's definitely a correlation between the release of your story and the attorneys from Amazon wanting to talk to us. And you certainly caught their attention.
Further, a Minnesota company called Men Grills that was marketing Afghan pressure cookers as camping equipment appears to have closed shop.
This is a huge news for the community. It's going to make our community, our kids, more safer.
Naveed Hamidi is executive director of the Afghan Health Initiative, the nonprofit that played a huge part in identifying the dangerous pots and getting the word out to families like Mr. Safi's. He says children in local families have suffered.
This is a big issue. We can show hundreds of families that you can look at their kids and you can see that, hey, this person is really affected by lead.
It causes irreversible neurological damage, and it has devastating consequences.
King County recommends that you cook with stainless steel, like Mr. Safi's family is now doing, and avoid any cookware that contains aluminum. It's not just the Afghan pressure cookers. King County researchers say they found high levels of lead in other types of imported aluminum pots and pans as well, and their research is continuing.
That was Chris Ingalls reporting. If you cannot afford to replace your aluminum pans with stainless steel, here are a few tips to help make your food safer in case your aluminum pans do contain lead. First, don't clean aluminum pans with harsh scrubbers or detergent. Use a delicate scrubber and mild soap. Avoid putting those pans in the dishwasher, as some detergents can be harsh when used with very hot water. Avoid cooking acidic foods like tomatoes or vinegar in aluminum cookware, and use wooden or silicone utensils because metal could damage the cookware's surface. Still to come here on The Story, the pump your own gas bill is on the cusp of becoming law in Oregon, but that did not stop many of you from sounding off to our email and voicemail inbox. Some happy, some, well, not so much. That's next when The Story returns. I may have been on vacation last week, but you can bet I heard all about the news of pump your own gas. It's going to become law this week. In case you missed it on Friday, Governor Koch did not indicate that she's going to veto House Bill 2426. And that means she's either going to sign it into law herself this week or not sign it and it becomes law without her signature. That is allowed under the state constitution. If you want to know the ins and outs of the constitutional issue, the team covered it last week. You can find that segment on the KGW YouTube channel. Anyway, as we await official word on the implementation of the bill, let's check on some of your thoughts after our story on Friday. Many of you feel a little bit like this.
Regarding the self-service new laws in Oregon, I find it self-sacrificing and self-soiling.
Oh boy, oh boy. Gary wrote to us as well. Well, I see another long-term Oregon first bit the dust. People move from other states and bring their bad ideas with them. Too bad. Many of you also are concerned about safety, especially those of you who have never pumped your own gas before. A viewer named Hank works as a gas attendant and says he's seen safety issues firsthand.
I work for Fred Meyer's pumping gas. Do you know how many stupid people drive off with the nozzle still in their car? I've only been there like 6 months, and it's happened 4 times. This is ridiculous for them to do it themselves.
Okay, I actually saw that happen with an attendant, by the way. But Jim could not disagree more, writing, "Get over it, people. It's over. There's no longer a story. Figure it out. 49 other states have done it. You can do it too." Well, slight correction to Jim's email. 48 states have done it because we have not officially done it yet. Anyway, once House Bill 2426 becomes law here, New Jersey will be the only state in the country where drivers are not allowed to pump their own gas. In any case, folks like Nancy say it's about time this law changed in Oregon.
I think pump your gas is a great thing. California's had it that way for years and it hasn't been a problem. So I'm glad to see it's going to be implemented here in Oregon, and at least now we won't be sitting in line waiting for an attendant because there's such a shortage. So thank goodness, it's about time. I want to pump my own gas.
That's the way to think about it. And that's the end of our show, by the way. Thanks for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. And don't forget, this is our new time slot, airing from 6:30 to 7 each weeknight. If you can't watch us during this time, be sure to find us on KGW YouTube channel or our streaming app, KGW+. Stick around now for the good stuff. It's coming your way next, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow at 6:30.